So, what makes a belief system the one? It's a question people have been asking for, well, forever. Today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating answer that doesn't come from some dense philosophical text, but from, of all places, an ancient love poem. Let's dive in and see how this all connects.
I mean, it's a huge question, right? One a lot of us have probably thought about. If you ask someone why they believe what they believe and why it's different, what's their answer? We're about to walk through one very specific and surprisingly structured answer to that exact challenge.
And this is where it gets really interesting, maybe even a little strange. The source for this whole argument is a Korean sermon, but it doesn't build its case on theology or doctrine. Nope, it builds it on the Song of Solomon, a book in the Old Testament that is, for all intents and purposes, a seriously passionate poem about human love.
Okay, so how on earth does a love song become the basis for a huge theological argument? Well, it all boils down to just one single verse. In this particular interpretation, the lover in the poem is seen as an allegory for Jesus, and this one line is used to build the entire case.
So here it is. My beloved is radiant and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. The sermon basically takes these three descriptions, radiant, ruddy, and outstanding, and treats them like a code. It's like each of these words is a key, unlocking a different piece of the puzzle.
Okay, so there you have it. That's our roadmap for this whole explanation, built from just those three words, ruddy, radiant, and outstanding. Let's start with that first clue, ruddy, and see how this case gets started.
All right, first up, ruddy. Now, literally in the poem, it just means someone has a healthy, reddish complexion, full of life. But in this sermon's interpretation, it's not about that at all. It takes on this much deeper, way more symbolic meaning.
So ruddy here is taken to mean the color of blood, specifically the blood of Jesus on the cross. The argument being made here is that while other faiths have great teachers or prophets, none claim that their central figure died for the sins of everyone else. This idea, atonement through a founder's sacrifice, is presented as the very first point of uniqueness.
All right, on to our second clue from that verse, radiant. And this is where the argument really pivots. It moves from the idea of sacrifice to what happened next, and it does so by drawing a really stark contrast with other major world religions.
So here's the core of this argument. The word radiant, which in the original Korean is higol, meaning white, is seen here as a symbol of purity, of life, of resurrection. The logic is pretty direct. If a founder was resurrected, they would, by definition, leave behind an empty tomb. The sermon then points to other major religious figures, arguing that their known burial sites make this a key difference. And to really hammer this point home, the sermon gives some very specific examples. It points out that Shakyamuni Buddha was cremated, and his relics are kept in sacred sites called stupas. And the tomb of Confucius, well, that's a famous UNESCO World Heritage Site in China you can visit today. So, in this view, the very fact that there isn't a similar tomb for Jesus is presented as proof of the resurrection.
Okay, so that brings us to our third and final piece of the puzzle, the word outstanding. And this is probably the most complex part of the argument, because this one word is unpacked into three separate qualities that are said to make this faith truly stand apart. So what exactly does it mean to be outstanding in this interpretation? Well, according to the sermon, it's a mix of three powerful virtues, a special kind of love, a hope that goes beyond our circumstances, and a source of genuine happiness. Let's break those down one by one.
Let's start with love. The sermon is very specific here. We're not just talking about any kind of love. It's agape love, which means it's completely unconditional and selfless. You give it without expecting anything back. To make the point, the speaker even contrasts it with other kinds of loyalty, arguing that even the bonds in a criminal gang are conditional, based on what you do for the group, whereas this love is supposed to be absolute.
All right, the second part of being outstanding is all about hope. This is explained with a really powerful story from the sermon. The quote you see here was apparently shared with a person in the congregation who was really struggling with poverty. The message was meant to be empowering, that your starting point in life doesn't have to be your ending point. The idea is that this belief gives you a hope that can overcome anything. And that brings us to the last piece of the outstanding puzzle, true happiness. And to back this claim up, the speaker points to a very specific moment in history, all starting with this year, 1935.
Okay, so the story goes like this. The speaker claims that when the famous Gallup polling organization was founded back in 1935, the very first topic they ever polled people on was happiness. And according to the sermon, that poll found that the number one thing that contributed to a person's happiness was having a religion, or more specifically, believing in Jesus. This is presented as historical data to prove the point.
All right, so we've unpacked all the clues: ruddy, radiant, and outstanding. Let's step back and put it all together to see the full picture that this sermon is painting. How do these clues from an ancient love poem add up to a complete answer? So here's the final answer, all laid out. It's a 5-point case for what makes this faith unique, all pulled from that one little verse. Ruddy represents the sacrifice on the cross. Radiant points to the resurrection. And outstanding is that 3-part combo of unconditional love, transcendent hope, and true happiness. That, right there, is the complete argument.
And you know, all of this leaves us with a much bigger question to chew on. What we just walked through was just one example, right? A deep dive into one sermon's very creative logic. But it makes you wonder, how do all belief systems across every culture and time take their most ancient, sacred texts and find new ways to interpret them, to build arguments that speak to us today and give meaning to the modern world?